Welcome back to the Elevate Your Best podcast. My name is Michael Danklefs. Today, I have two amazing people with me that I want to bring their story to the world. Last month, we talked to Jen Andriani. This week, we have Dani and Jensey. They're also similarly Lifebook leaders. We'll be asking them a couple of questions about their journey through this process of Lifebook and becoming a Lifebook leader, as well as some of the challenges and the roadblocks that they've come up with. Dani, would you introduce yourselves to our audience, please?
Alrighty, I am Dani Glazer, and this is my husband, James Jensey, who goes by Jensey to a lot of people now. So
pretty much everybody you introduced me to.
Pretty much. We can tell how you know him by what you call him, basically.
I still find it fascinating in your guys' story that you didn't even know that he had a first name for quite a while, that you just thought his name was Jensey instead of James.
Yeah, his college roommates totally, that's what they called him. And it was just like, I thought it was an Asian name, but turns out it was his email address. So
yeah, back in the days when everybody truncated things together, and since email, back in the good old days when email was just starting to become more common and everything, when we were in college and stuff like that, people started using email handles. If you could pronounce it into a word, then that became your nickname, and that's where it came from, and it stuck.
I was lucky they couldn't do that with mine.
Very nice. It's similar, like on a men's team, people tend to go by their last names, or on a team, a football team, or the military, similar. You come up with that nickname. Awesome that you have that personal connection. So what made the two of you really decide to start the Lifebook journey together?
Oh man, he had that October, in 2017, he fell up the stairs, and that led us to discover he had no nerve function from the knee down, and he had spent almost a week in the hospital being diagnosed with one thing, and he was getting monthly IVIGs. So we had no control over our life. And I had watched Lifebook the year before, and I just did the masterclass, and then somehow or another it came back and we watched it together, and we just felt called to do it, because I had wanted to do it last year, but this year we had the Christmas money to put forward to it, and we were like, okay, let's do this. He was interested. It gave us something to do together, but most importantly, it gave us a control over our life that we didn't have. It gave us a sense of certainty in looking into who we were and how we wanted to live our lives.
Yeah, it's not really that much different for me, is that Dani was always the one who was into the personal growth and development field, and was always looking into different classes and things like that. Whenever she saw something that was interesting, she'd ask me about it. But really, yeah, it was when my health took that downturn and we were in that state of not knowing what was going on or how we were going to be, where things were going in the future. We were like, okay, what can we do to get control of our life, or figure out what we still have control over, since my health was the big question mark that kind of lingered over everything else. And we knew changes were coming, and in anticipation of that, when she showed me Lifebook, I was in a mindset where I was just open and receptive to, okay, yeah, let's do it. Let's see what happens.
Yeah.
Nice. Yeah, it tends to be that there is some sort of transition or a trigger that gets you to, I need to do something different with my life. I think that's how many of us start our personal development journey, is something like that. And sometimes it's out of control, sometimes it's out of surrender. And it sounds like it was a little bit of both for you guys. Okay, we're going down this path, let me at least hold on to the rails. Gotcha. And did it really, it sounds like that's what you wanted. Did you get that?
Oh, totally, because we had no clue that approximately 7 months later, he would be diagnosed with poem syndrome, and our life would be completely turned upside down. When he started, because so we started in December, and then in March, he started feeling funny in his hands, and the neurologist was like, something else is wrong, and you need to go to.
He wanted me to see, he was looking for specialists beyond what he was capable of. He was a general neurologist, but he wanted me to go see specialists somewhere that dealt with peripheral neuropathies and things like that. So he had put in a request to the Mayo Clinic out in Minnesota and the Cleveland Clinic as well. And then we knew someone who worked at Johns Hopkins in Baltimore, and we reached out to them to see if they could help us possibly get in there as well. And it was a waiting game for several months, waiting to hear back from the people reviewing my records and everything like that and whatnot, in order to find out if any of them could take my case on and start going in depth with things. But during that time, I had a nurse coming to the home giving me immunoglobulin infusions once a month via IV. And that was like a 6-hour process once a month, where they would just come in and put an infusion pump and IV into my arm and give me fresh plasma. And for a while that was working, but then the efficacy of that started to diminish, and that's how we knew something else was going on. But one of the nice things about by that time, we had pretty much made it through not only creating our life book, but we'd also done the mastery boot camp. So we had already narrowed down our vision into our goals and everything like that. And we had our sacred choices all lined out. We had a lot of things just set up. So even when things started to show that we weren't out of the woods yet, so to speak, we had those structures and plans in place so that as things shifted, we were able to shift more easily with it. So
I think a big part of it too is the mindset, because you gain a certain mindset as you go through Lifebook, that things are adaptable and we had the structure and the format. And so we knew that even if things changed, which they did, because we ended up having to live between 2 states and he ended up needing radiation treatment, but it was all possible because we had our sacred choices set up. They didn't really shift. We had our goals in place. And even though we weren't sure, we had already tweaked our life vision and our goals were mainly focused on his health. So we had already set up a really strong foundation. And then when we got tweaks and twists and turns, we were able to, what's the word that everybody's using now? Adapt, pivot as a result.
It sounds like there was a fair amount of preparation you already put in. So whenever things did go off the rails, that you already had some foundation to come back to. You had something that you could really work within, that then it's okay, we could pivot this part and the rest of it's still here. You just open for another possibility without having to change the whole scheme of your whole life turning upside down.
Yeah.
So that sounds like that very much overlapped over things started going south health-wise for you, Jensey. You did the Lifebook process and then it got worse. If we were to go back and focus on just that Lifebook phase, when you're really doing the PVPS, when you're actually going through the structure, what came up for you specifically around doing the Lifebook?
Oh, let's see. In some ways, when going through that, it was some of the things that I didn't really have a clear understanding of in my life. Like I didn't have specific health and fitness goals. My main idea was to stay healthy, but that kind of got shot to hell in a handbasket, out of my own control. So then it was, okay, then there are certain things about my health and fitness that I can still control. So I started delving into ways of managing like autoimmune disorders and inflammation and things like that while we were still trying to figure things out, because I knew that I was having some autoimmune issues. I knew that there was something that was there, my nervous system itself was getting overridden and just being taken out by my own immune system at that point. So I was looking for things like dietary things that I could do to help offset that and whatnot. And then things with like my emotional state and things like that was another thing that I really delved into and started to reframe and rework the way that I focused on not only what I was going through, but how I was dealing with it. In doing the process, one of the biggest tools that came out of it, and one of the biggest things is it made me really focus on being present and focusing on not thinking about what might happen down the road or anything like that, but focusing on the immediacy and the moment and what I had control of now, and just slowly tweaking things, seeing what worked and what didn't work, and staying present rather than allowing my mind to start wandering of all the what ifs down the road about all of those things, and just focusing on now and what I had control of and what I could do now.
Well, it made a really big difference too, so much so that the doctors actually noticed his mindset and his focus on the positive, because we learned real fast. I mean, when he was first diagnosed and we looked it up, what it meant, I was like, I told the kids, do not under any circumstances look this up, because we don't want you, this may or may not happen. It's no sense worrying about it. We don't know what we're dealing with. And it was that moment, because we didn't know what the outcome would be. We just decided we were going to look for the gifts. We were going to keep as upbeat and he noticed directly how he managed his emotions. We had a couple of incidences that happened during the radiation was the one, and then after, that really challenged us emotionally to be present and understanding and to be compassionate. Because for me, there was one of the challenges that happened, really, I had to look at certain people in my life and be very forgiving, because if I carried that anger with me, if I carried the frustration with me, it only affected him in a negative way. So I'm like, okay, I need to do what's best for us. And that means I need to manage my emotions. And so I pretty much, both of us, I think we completely respond to things different emotionally now than we did. And we learned it as we were going through that process, and we learned it because of our emotional categories. Mm-hmm. But the doctors were constantly saying, we're telling him, I don't understand how you're still doing this or how you're still doing that. And like when we were going through one of the incidents with one of the people in our lives, and I was so angry, and he was like, I can't carry that anger. I can't, because so I was probably angry for the both of us until I was able to process and deal with that. And I realized it was hurting him. But you really managed to just take a whole different perspective. And he was just like, he would make choices like, okay, this is worth it. This is not worth it. This person is worth it. This person is not worth it. And I think it was we learned so much. And it's because we had a life book that I don't know if we would have handled things.
It gave us a language from which we could communicate mm-hmm. with each other better, rather than, because a lot of times the way everybody deals with things in their own way. And sometimes when you're mm-hmm. trying to communicate it to a partner or friends or anybody else, sometimes the words you use for yourself are very different than what your partner or somebody else might use. So both of us having gone through Lifebook, it also gave us that common language where we could refer to things and use that as a structure around the way we had discussions about different things, that made it a lot easier for us to both understand where each other were coming from a lot of the time.
Got it. I know that so far you've actually covered two of the major categories, both health and fitness and emotional. And we're actually at this point at the tail end of the intellectual month. But we'll be talking a little bit more about some of the other categories here in a minute. I just think it's interesting that those were the two that you really tackled. And I know that emotional tends to be a lot more difficult, or at least it's stereotypically more difficult for us men. And so I can certainly see having already done some of that groundwork in the process allowed you to process those emotions in a different way, know what is part of your vision, and apply strategies in order to keep the emotions present in the recipes that you want. So it's awesome. So with that in mind, what was the hardest category for each of you independently?
I got stuck in a few. Do you want to go first?
Sure. The hardest category for me actually was emotional. We had the shift and everything around my physical well-being, but emotional was really the hardest category for me because of the environment I grew up in and just the way I was raised. I grew up under that very kind of stereotypical idea of men don't cry, you don't express emotion, and all of those kind of things. And on top of that, my mother's from Taiwan, and she has her family and everybody are very reserved They tend to be more, my mom, and like the cultures in Taiwan, they're very different depending on where you are, where you live on the island, because the southern part of the island used to be a lot more Japanese influenced, while the northern was a lot more Chinese influenced. But even then, there's a lot of repressed emotion in the Asian culture. The expression of emotion is a very kind of thing that is kept personal, private, and away from public life and things like that. And even within family, it's a very restrictive thing. Growing up, emotion was something that I was taught always to shut down and close in. And when I started getting sick, I found that was actually extremely detrimental, because all it did was create internal stressors and things like that. And that was something I became acutely aware of because of my neurological disorders and things like that. I could feel it in my nervous system and through my body. It's if I held those emotions in, if I held that, and most of the time, the emotions you were allowed to express tended to be geared toward more of anger or and things of that nature, because that's considered a normal and okay response for men. And that was one of those things and those things were actually extremely detrimental to my physical health. And so I actually started to see a therapist to help me deal with those things because of the adverse effects that it was having on my body and things like that. And while I had thought about it before, the idea of where I wanted to go, what I wanted to in my life, like with my life vision and everything like that, I was the person that I am now is not the person that I want to be in my vision. So how do I get there? And the beginning of that was working with a therapist and start trying to help me understand the emotions and also what healthy emotions were, because I had grown up in that environment for so long. I did not really even understand what I often found myself thinking about what was the appropriate emotional response to something, rather than just allowing myself to feel an emotional response. So it became more of an intellectual exercise rather than an actual feeling. And so those were things that I actively had to seek help with and get work on in order to get to closer to the person that I want to be and that I'm trying to be.
It sounds like you really had to unlearn to
Yes.
think your way through emotions, because you can't resolve an emotional problem with an intellectual solution.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Gotcha. And I would actually want to point out too is it's something that's common, I think, not just in Taiwanese culture, but I think across a lot of the globe, that men are allowed to express anger and fear. And that's about it.
Yeah.
But there's so many other nuances on that emotional wheel that we go through. But as you said, okay, so how do I filter that through anger?
Yeah.
Does that help me or them? It tends to shut people down instead. But I also like the fact that recognizing that you needed help. And as much as Dani, I know that you've been really supportive of him, sometimes you need a third party perspective that is qualified and trusted to help you through those things. So it's good that you actually got to a place where you could do that.
And that too was difficult because I had to overcome the stigmas that within my own family, not with Dani and my kids or anything, but with my extended family, like my parents and my dad's side of the family and my mom's side of the family and everything like that, because that was, to them, that was a shameful thing to have to, one, to have to admit you need help for something, two, because it deals with emotions and everything like that. And it really, yeah, exactly, it's stacked. So it was one of those things where it was one of the biggest shifts emotionally that we made, which was also one of the hardest shifts to make, was that what we have to do what's right for us. And it's to hell with what anybody else thinks or how anybody else views it, because they're not the ones going through this right now. And we have to do what's best for us. But getting to that point, there you also deal with the guilt and the not shame, but you feel you're breaking all of these things that a lot of times you're raised with, and you don't even realize are beliefs or things that are ingrained in you over time, until it gets to a point where it's either breakthrough or leave yourself tied down and struggling with chains you don't have to bear.
Absolutely. I very much resonate with that. We're doing a Elevation Mindset Summit at the end of this month around beliefs. and really touching on that idea of most of our beliefs are not ours. They were actually impressed upon us by our culture, by our family, by our peers, by our schooling. And is one of the things that I like the most about Lifebook as a framework, as a process is, and what we're really going to be nailing on in this summit is your beliefs you can choose.
Yeah.
It may not be easy, but it is a choice. And I like that idea of you need to choose what is right for you. And not even just right for you, but right for you now.
Yeah.
Because what was right for you at 6 or at 12 or at 20 is different than at 30 or 40.
Yeah, absolutely.
So that's quite a journey to go through. And it's one of the things that I appreciate about people who really engage in this kind of work.
Oh man. Well, so when we did Lifebook together, we did it together, but individually, but in the same room. And I used to get really frustrated because he would just like whip things out, and it would take me like, it took me a while. There were quite a few categories, like health and fitness was easy because I had health and fitness. Intellectual was surprisingly hard because I needed to deal with some beliefs that I didn't think I was an intellectual. I didn't think I was smart enough. So really seeing myself in a different light and recognizing that I am a lifelong learner. I just learn differently than most people. And I may not retain as much information as others, but what I retain is always been integral in my connections and communications with others. Emotional was huge. One of the reasons after he finished radiation treatments, and we had a couple of incidences, I sought a therapist to process these really intense emotions of anger that I was feeling towards specific people in our lives and their behaviors while we were going through this, because I was so floored. And now looking back, I'm able to see, okay, these people were just as scared. They were going through their own things. And when you're caught up in what you're going through, you become, I don't want to say narcissistic, but you become very self-focused because you're trying to make it through a situation. And when I was after therapy and working on my own emotions, I was able to realize and see these people for who they really are, who they really were. I still kept very firm boundaries, and some of them it was like, goodbye. I am not going to deal with this toxic behavior. But I was able to get to a place of peace, whereas before, I would just, every time their name was mentioned, I would get so angry because I would remember the events that we had been through. And like Jensey said, I wanted to be a person of compassion. I wanted to be a person of kindness and respect. And I wanted to have firm boundaries in place. And that's connected with the social category, which when we did that, I was like, oh, this is not a problem. I've got the social category mastered. But what was fascinating is I actually wrote letters to specific friends that I thought I was very close to during the social category. And some of them responded, and we have like amazing relationships to this day. And others were like, oh, that's fine. We don't need to worry about that. And it's been interesting because there has been a distance that has developed for whatever reason. And I'm not like, as we all know, there are people who come into your lives for a reason or a season, and I still care and love them, but the relationship has just changed since we went through everything that we've been through. And so I think what fascinated me was some of the ones that gave me the most grief trying to nail down, and it was a while too before I actually finished the character category. Like I knew I needed, I can't even remember what the one character trait that I was working on now anymore. It was what is it? To finish things, to actually finish things. Resolution. Persist. No, I think it was an R. I think it was like,
It might have been resolution.
I think it was resolution, because I would start things and never finish. Now I can't remember the word. How embarrassing. But
Resilience.
yeah, resilience was natural. We just sort of didn't have it. We did have a choice in that one, and we chose it, but it was, I cannot remember the word. But anyways, it basically was to see things through, which made me really, before I commit to anything, like I stopped committing to just everything and anything. And unless I knew I could see it through to the end, I wouldn't say yes. I cannot remember that word. I'm going to remember it after this. And then I'll be like, Michael, this is the word I was thinking of.
We will put it in if we can always cut it and put it back in here. So that's okay. All good. And it does, a lot of this does play into the idea of knowing what the recipes are for the emotions you want. What are the recipes you want to grow your intellectual life? What is the recipes that's going to get you in a better state of health? Pro and con. Do more of what works and less of what doesn't, and try new things. It is, and it's one of those things that's like a business plan, is that it's never done. You're still always refining it too, as you learn what works differently to get the results you're aiming for. So we touch on the ones that were difficult. What were the easiest ones?
He makes it easy.
Oh, so sappy. Right up my alley. Excellent.
Actually, when we were doing the love category, I was like, oh, we've got this nailed. This is not a problem. It brought up some stuff that I was not aware of and he was not aware of. But as a result, it really made us stronger because we were able to communicate about things we didn't even think about until Lifebook brought them to the surface. And we've always had communication as our number one thing, above all, communicate. But we started realizing that he wasn't fully communicating things because he was afraid of how I would react emotionally. And I wasn't fully communicating things for various reasons. And so once we realized what that was and connected it with the emotions, then we just had to give each other permission to, okay, just say it. And I think one of the things that's really been helpful too is the Ho'opono, where we've just really in the last 2 years started practicing that, because there are certain times when I get really emotional and I feel, and it's hormonal, and I get really vulnerable, and I have to say to him, I'm feeling really vulnerable right now. So I'd probably be laughing at that comment if I wasn't feeling so raw. And so we learned a new way to communicate, a deeper level to communicate. And then two, just there were different aspects of our relationship that we were able to shine a light on it and really deal with at a deeper level.
Can you describe that before we move on? Can you describe that Ho'opono? What's that process you're talking about?
The Ho'opono is basically, what I love about it, it's basically forgiveness. And you look into each other's eyes and you say, I'm sorry.
I love you.
I love you. Please forgive me.
Thank you.
And you do that 3 times, but then the other person does it too. So it's basically no one's at blame. It's like you're taking the responsibility of 2 halves for the whole, instead of you did this and it's your fault. It becomes, and either person can say it. So if I feel like I've done something that's hurt him, or sometimes it's been my tendency, if I'm feeling in that vulnerable state, I tend to pull away, and then he'll do the Ho'oponopono, and then I'll do it, and then it brings us back together.
Yeah, it's something that we picked up from a Tony Robbins thing that we did. He's a big proponent of it, and you can actually find, I think, videos of him going through the exercise with couples at some of his seminars and stuff on his YouTube channel and whatnot. But John and Missy have talked about it too. But the thing about it, I think, that works really well is it removes you from focusing or getting caught up in the stories that we often get into when we are in conflict with our partner or someone else. And it focuses you on the immediacy of the moment. And by looking into each other's, one of the things when you look into your partner's eyes and you're saying these things, is they ask you, instead of focusing on all these things that created the turbulence or turmoil, focus on the things that you truly love and care about the person, your partner, or the person that you're having this moment with, and hold on to those good moments. And when you're saying this, it's not so much apologizing, but it's basically forgiving. It's forgiving yourself as well as the situation, more so than assigning any kind of blame or responsibility over the situation. It's more of, I acknowledge that I'm upset by this situation, but I am choosing to let it go, because this is temporary to what we have. And it has really made things a lot easier, because a lot of times those conflicts are fleeting moments that are usually miscommunications or misunderstandings over something. And in the heat of the moment, they can spiral out of control, and it's better to rope that in before it becomes a larger issue. So that's one of the reasons why we do it.
Nice. I love it. I know that you are some of the Lifebook experts in the community, so you've actually obviously played the interconnection between all these things. So pitting you down in one category is going to be nearly impossible because it's all interconnected. So then, Jensey, for you, what would you say the easiest category was?
So like with Dani, the love category, mostly because Dani and I have been married for, let's see, this was 2017. So we've been married 16 years when all of this started. So we got married in 2001. And one of the things we promised each other was that that above everything else, we would always work to make our relationship work. And so that has always been, I think, if you want to refer to it in Lifebook terms, that's been our overriding goal through everything else. Even after we had kids and everything like that, we were like, we can't do this if we aren't doing this together. So we always put our relationship as the highest priority. Now, unlike where John and Missy were talking about going on dates once a week or whatever, overnight dates and everything like that, we never did that. We never got to the point where we felt comfortable leaving our kids with somebody, especially living where we are. We don't live near family or anything like that. So it wasn't like we could ask family or somebody to watch our kids or anything.
And our youngest one is at the time was allergic to every food under literally so many foods. So even if we left them with a trusted somebody, there was inevitably, oh, we tried to give her that. She would break out if you touched flour to her face. So it was really bad, a lot of anaphylactic. So for us, we just didn't feel comfortable leaving them.
Yeah. And so we just found different ways of making that work. But our love relationship's always been like the foundation from which we built everything. And when we did Lifebook, one of the things, like Dani was saying, is we realized, one, we had a really strong foundation, but there was still a lot of room to grow in. And it also helped align us with, like I had mentioned before, using Lifebook as a framework, it allows you to align things and start to speak the same language, because Dani and I are very different personality and the way we approach things and deal with things. She's already mentioned how very emotional she can be, and I'm very much go down the intellectual route when things start to get out of hand. And a lot of times I found that I would often make it more difficult for her to understand what I was feeling because I would overcomplicate my explanation of something because I felt the need to explain it in detail, because that's how I think. And so it gave us a way of communicating a little bit easier, and then working with the therapists and everything has helped with that. And even now, even to this day, we still see our love relationship as the foundation from which everything builds. But we also realize that early on, our love relationship was the only thing we really focused on. So other things tended to fall away or take less importance. Now, our love relationship is still that strong foundation from which we build, but we realize we don't have to focus on it as much because we've strengthened the way we work on it, so that we don't have to do as many things to shore it up and keep it going. And we found ways of tying it in, like you were mentioning before, Michael, where the interconnectivity, we found how to connect it with the other things that we're doing, so that all of these things just feed in on one another. So when we're working on one particular area, whether it's dealing with our finances and things like that, like when we do our finances and stuff together, we refer to it as a money date now. So we sit together and we look at it and we make ourselves tea, and sometimes we'll have a snack while we're doing it. And when we're discussing money, because money tends to be one of those things that can cause a lot of friction within couples or anything like that. And so we found ways of changing our mindset around it. And it makes it a lot easier, and it goes a lot smoother. We find we get through all of those things a lot faster, and there isn't that level of stress or tension anymore. But yeah, in the long roundabout way, love category was still was the easiest, but we found that it really does lend to everything else. But love was definitely, when we were going through it the first time, we were like, it's nice to know that we have a really strong foundation. Let's make it better.
I will
Absolutely.
say that one thing I did get from Lifebook is we did start weekly dates with each other, but we got creative about it. We didn't just go away for the whole night because that just wasn't feasible for us. But like now we know Friday nights are date night. And so whether we go out someplace or whether we sit on a couch and watch a movie together, like, those are designated date nights. And then Sunday nights that's when we talk about our dreams and we'll talk about our life books. That's like we call it our sacred time. And that's when that's usually when we talk.
And it helps now that both of our kids are much older. Our
Yes.
eldest is 18 now and our youngest is 13. So they are self-sufficient. There's a lot less input they need from us to get through their days and everything like that. So it frees up time for us to say, okay, your mother and I are going to, the living room is ours. Leave us alone for a few hours.
This is our kingdom. You
Yeah.
come in, expect to be, prepare to be boarded. Yes. Got it. It's good that they're now, and as a good example of setting that boundary, I know that's one of the key things that is talked about in the love relationship category, is that seeing that tight relationship, that you have been so tied to each other and value each other so much that you're willing to carve off time, sometimes to the exclusion of them. I'm sure that there's an emergency, if there's a appendage that's missing, that things will shift. If there's fire in the house, obviously date night goes out the window, but still carving out that time and making it that sacred space. So that's awesome. You've talked a fair amount of what has changed. Is there one thing that really stands out that has happened since you did that Lifebook process that stands out above all the rest?
You want to go or do you want me
You
to
can
go?
go.
Okay.
And then I'll go.
One of the things, the biggest thing for me since doing Lifebook that really has made the biggest impact for me, and it just that I see has affected my life going forward, is that I'm much freer in the way that I approach things. I'm much more relaxed with the way that I deal with things. I find that in part I had to do it because stress adversely affected my health. But even as I've gotten better, I have found it actually easier to maintain that sense of being able to let go and just remaining more so present than worrying so much about what's coming down the road or what's in the future. I've become much more comfortable with not knowing, without having to. Ironically, Lifebook gave us a much better sense of being in control that allowed me to let go of the need for that control.
Yep.
So it's so much easier when things just come out of nowhere, or when something suddenly shifts. It's I will get upset at times, I will get frustrated at times, but instead of it lingering and holding on to that feeling and having it influence the way I interact, not only with Dani and the kids, but just with like my job or anything else like that in general, it's okay, this is happening. And then the next thought that comes through my head is, what is there any benefit to holding on to this frustration or anger or anything right now? Is it serving a purpose, or am I just, and then I find that when those negative emotions actually rise up, it's so much easier for me to let go of them when I think of it in that context. Is this serving a purpose, or am I just harming myself by holding on to it? And 95% of the time, it's the latter part of that. It's not serving any purpose. So process it, let it go, move on. And so I think that's probably the biggest thing for me.
I don't know if I can narrow it down to one thing. I don't know if I can narrow it down to one thing, because it's affected me. The big joke is now Dani can connect anything to Lifebook. So you give me something, I will connect it to multiple categories.
So that in itself, was that a strength of yours before you did Lifebook that you realized?
I think I have always connected
But did you realize that you could make those connections
No.
to make them relatable?
first.
So that's a strength, that you can actually see the value from this that can impact these areas. The
Oh, yeah.
Clifton strength, I believe, is called relator.
Yeah, I think Dani always, she always used to say she felt like she was really good at connecting people or connecting things together and whatnot. But I don't think she ever really understood how to make that work. And I think after doing Lifebook, you actually, because Lifebook gave you a language for which to connect things to. So now it allows you to actually expand out beyond that. So you always find a way of tying it back to Lifebook.
Yeah. I think too, I'm really good at leveraging, like when it comes to creating habits or doing something. If I'm going to do something, I figure out like what categories does this affect. And every week in one of my accountability groups, I go through and I list out like what I've done for each category each week and how that is influenced. And there's usually always overlap. So yeah.
Got it. I like the combination of those things, is you seeing where it can all go there, but then having a language to, is one of the other big constructs of Lifebook is you take it all apart so you can put it back together. And it's actually more efficient when you put it back together. When you've actually taken apart, you understand the individual parts, and knowing how those all interrelate very much kind of, makes that connection. And that is a skill, because some people can't have that if it's spatial relations or that kind of how the things are intertwined. And the interconnectivity is, sometimes people just need that one thing. So that's definitely great that you have that awareness and can use it. And for me, understanding is a great place, but it also sounds like you're applying it. So one of the big things for me is not just knowledge, but wisdom. It sounds like you're using it, not just talking about it.
Oh yeah, it's funny. I walk with my daughter, my eldest daughter, every day this year. We've challenged ourselves to see rain, sleet, or snow. We have a limit, a target, and then most of the time we aim beyond the target, which is 30 minutes. But we've been talking about Lifebook because we had her go through it when she was 16, and she was like, not really. She didn't really resonate with her. But now she's finishing up her gap year, and I need a life vision. And so we're getting ready to dive back into that. And we were talking about the category interconnectivity. And I was so proud because we were discussing how her writing can be connected to different categories. And then she was telling me we were talking about walking. You go on a walk, if you do it the right way, you can technically hit all 12 categories on one walk. And so it was so cute because she's done it. It didn't really resonate with her at the time, but she's still implementing these principles. And so I was so proud the other day. I was like, oh my gosh, category interconnectivity, woo.
It's also awesome when we hear our words coming out of our kids' mouths. You're like, so it did actually stick and go in there. Checkmark in Dani's parenting category. Nice. So being that you, once again, this question is a moot point because you've already covered it, is how often do you refer back to the original categories pages of your Lifebook?
I used to do it every month. I would do the deep dive every month. I would, rewatch the videos. And now last year, we had a lot of, my word for the year last year was action, and his was opportunities. And so we had a lot of action and opportunities. So I did not get to delve in monthly as I would like. In fact, it was maybe more quarterly for me. When I get ready to go over it again with my daughter, I will we've already discussed, I'm going to go back through mine again, probably just like during that time. But I usually touch on it. Optimally, I like to just touch each category each month, but then again, I'm doing it daily. I'm always thinking about what categories have I touched on today. When I fill out my sacred choices, most of my sacred choices are connected to multiple categories. So technically I'm touching it on a daily basis, but actually going in and rereading it was a lot more often now because I'm just doing more things. It's not as often as I'd like it to be, but we've had a lot of stuff come up this year that we've been fun stuff, new stuff. I changed my career category from when I started. My career was originally a, stay-at-home mom and caregiver, and that's shifting big time now. So
yeah, for me, I don't actively go back to my Lifebook except for once a year. We actually sit and we redo our Lifebooks together. We go through the categories, we update things, we shift things, we move things. But I don't actively reread my Lifebook all that often, except when I start to notice I'm getting stuck somewhere, I will pull it out and actually reread that section. And also too, I don't find I need to go back to it all that much, just from with being ambassadors in the community and everything like that, in the Lifebook community and stuff like that. We're immersed in it all the time. And if it's almost like it never really leaves, but I always know where I'm going. It's like our life vision, I come back to every couple of weeks. I will actually look at it and just read through it and see if those are the things I'm still building toward. If that's really where we are trying to go. Even though we do it at the end of every year, we always are aware that things can happen that'll shift things where we're going. And sometimes where we think we're trying to get to isn't always exactly where we are going to end up or where we actually want to end up. So sometimes we will go back and make subtle shifts and alterations, but I don't actively go back into my life book all that much. I find that I work better when I don't have those specific things always lingering over me, because if you, according to the Gretchen Rubin 4 personalities, I'm a rebel. So ironically, the more structure you try to impose, the less likely it is to get done for me. So it's finding that nice balance between the two, and I've started discovering that a lot more in the last year or two. I'm starting to really find my rhythm with how much structure I need to feel like I'm guiding myself in the right direction, but not so rigidly that I don't have the freedom to explore other avenues.
And what I know of you that totally makes sense is if you actually keep smacking you in the face of it, you finally just turn around and walk away from it. So I get it. And once again, it sounds like Dani's doing enough of that for the both of you. So
well, I'm a questioner, so which drives him bonkers a lot of the times, because I'm constantly asking questions and why this and why that and what, which is another reason my life book is absolutely perfect for me, because
got it. So is there anything that came up that really was like out of left field? You talked about a couple of surprises of you thought you had this under, but there's definitely room for growth. Was there anything that was like so the exact opposite or completely different than what you expected when you've really for the two of you? I think it's not as just as you're going through the program, but as it has unfolded over the last 4 years. Is there anything that was like, wow?
I think for us, it was accomplishing our vision. Like our first vision, we accomplished 75% of it year before last?
2 years. Right before the pandemic.
Right before the pandemic hit, we accomplished 75% of our life vision that we totally weren't expecting. And we weren't really, other than doing the daily things and being open to opportunities, we weren't really doing much. And we've been noticing that just living Lifebook, just having the categories, and even if we don't look at it, stuff happens. Like last year, we met some goals and we were just like, how is this possible? Like, when did this happen? How did we do this? Because I think the biggest surprise for us has been that sometimes setting the intention is enough to align yourself to accomplishing the things that you're trying to accomplish. And while we put work toward these things, and while it's just like bringing awareness to what it is we're trying to achieve is almost enough sometimes to actually achieve it, because sometimes when you focus down on it, you start to miss the opportunities and things that are around you. And we've gotten to the point where once again, I think it really comes down to that idea of control. There was so much desire to have control of our lives that we were micromanaging things and missing so many opportunities around us. And as we've been doing, the more time we do Lifebook and whatnot, we learn to step back far enough to see the opportunities there and seize the ones that we truly want to take advantage of, and not feel like we're overloading ourselves. We still hit moments where we have a lot going on and we feel like we're doing too much, but at the same time, we also know that things aren't just going to pop up and show up on our doorstep. We do have to actively work to make things happen, but sometimes it's not as much as you think it is to get it done. We really set the bar for our life vision when we redid it this last year, which is a little nervous because we're like, okay, it'd be fascinating to see how much of this will we accomplish, because we just upped the bars in areas that made me nervous, because I'm like, there's no way. But then I'm like, but I can't say there's no way, because if you would have asked me when we started 4 or 5 years ago, I would never expect it. Like where we are today, I would have never expected. And I love despite everything we've been through. And I think that's another thing I've gained from Lifebook is I love who I am and I love my life. And people will say to me all the time, oh, I wish I had Lifebook in my 20s, which, I mean, ultimately, if you're 20 and watching this, or go out and do Lifebook, because it will be beneficial. People will be like, I wish I had it. But if I went back and did Lifebook when I was 20, I don't know if I ever would have met him. I don't know if I would have had the same life. The road brought me here. And then we found Lifebook. And one of the things that I've gained from it is, okay, I can't go back and change the past. We don't have time travel yet that I'm aware of. And I don't know if I want to, because of the whole butterfly effect thing. I think what just excites me so much is I love who I am now because I'm aware of who I am. And when I started Lifebook, I did not think I was intellectual at all. I think I have done more in the month of intellectual life for the community. And that's not like a category that I would pick as my strong point, but I do love to learn, and I've always loved to learn. And being able to see myself in a whole different way, and part of the reason why we accomplished a good part of our living, because it was how we wanted to feel each day. And I do wake up most days like really excited about, oh, I get to do this project, or oh, I get to talk with this person, or oh, I get to do, what I want to do. And then if there's things that pop up that I don't want to do, or that I want to, or rather, if there's things that pop up that I want to do, but I'm not doing, and then then I just evaluate. It's, wait, do I really want to do this? Yes. Okay, so why am I not making time for it? And then it's, okay, if I really want to make time for this, then what do I have to let go of or just shift around? And yeah.
I just have to reiterate that whole idea of setting the intention sometimes is enough. So I'm actually taking a couple of people right now through Lifebook Mastery. So they've actually done and built their Lifebook, and they're now moving into the steps you take to execute it. And just had our session last night. He's, I can't believe that this is coming up right now. And if this actually happens in the next week, it's going to hit a monthly goal, a quarterly goal, and an annual goal, and my foundational goal. Check, all the way up the funnel of focus. I can't believe this is happening right now, but at the same time, I can believe this is happening right now. That's awesome. And so many people I've heard say that because they've actually set the goal out there. They put the flag in the sand, and it may be a 5-year goal. And holy crap, 3 months later, it's actually your reality, or very near close to, or even 75% of getting to a foundational goal is a pretty fair distance to travel by intention and actually following intentional actions. So it's a great, and even talking with you now, I want to send this interview to one of my other students. This is what's possible for you. If you engage in the process, I plan on it. It's what's possible. And the idea of, I'm not sure if this is going to work. I've seen enough social proof with the community to know that this works for people. In fact, when you were talking about that, I wanted to just say, yeah, this shit works. Engage in it. Let's go.
Yeah, it does.
So obviously you've made so many shifts and changes in your life. And what I like is that you said, I love who I am because I'm aware of who I am. But at the same time, you're still also engaged in this growth and this change to be the next best version of you. And it's this strange paradox. And it's awesome to see that actually like in reality with you guys.
Yeah, it's funny because I think a lot of people think that once you learn to love yourself, that's the end of the road. That's the end of that process. Once you learn to love yourself, then everything is wonderful and everything's great. And yes, you do find that things get easier, but you also realize there are so many other doors to open once you get to there, because you start to realize that all these things you denied yourself, all these things you didn't believe you were capable of or capable of reaching, suddenly become possible, because the thing that held you back, that thing that holds most of us back majority of the time, is ourselves, and that belief that we can't do something. And once you can start once you really embrace who you are, you start to realize just the breadth and scope of what you can accomplish as yourself. And then suddenly those ideas of this is all that I need isn't there anymore, because what you're trying, because those limitations that sometimes you subconsciously set, like when we were talking about before, about whether it's societal, familial, or whatever, ingrained in you before you even realize that they're ingrained in you, suddenly become something that is possible. And it's there's never an end to growth, because we can always do more, we can always be more, we can always experience more, and it's actually a very freeing thing to realize.
Mm-hmm. I think too, I've heard some people say they want to accept who they are and they don't want to change, and I think the thing is like that there are possibilities and opportunities everywhere, and I think that's one of the key things that Lifebook really helps you to recognize is look for the opportunities, look for the possibilities, believe in yourself, because you take the time to become aware of who you are. And yes, there are shadow sides to all of us, and they're just a part of who we are. And you can hate that part of yourself, or you can embrace that part of yourself and find a way to work with it, whether it is changing a belief, whether it is, okay, I have this habit, can I change this habit? Or can I just accept that I have this, that I'm perfectly imperfect? I am a recovering perfectionist, or I was a perfectionist. And now my phrase is, I am perfectly imperfect. And sometimes I will purposely do things to mess up with the perfection, which drives certain people crazy if I angle things when they want them all nice and straight. Or if I do a painting, I will purposely have a mistake in the painting, or so.
Yeah, triggering that CDO is always tough because OCD is in the wrong order.
Yep. As soon as you said that, I was like, oh God.
So being how much growth the two of you have had by doing this process, it seems like, once again, a rhetorical question. Why become a Lifebook leader with this? Especially, actually, for the two of you, with how involved in the community that you are, why go that extra step? Why get the certification?
Missy told me to. Actually, during one of the calls, I was questioning career. And I was saying like that I love being a stay-at-home mom, and I was his caregiver, but I wanted something more. And Missy was like, oh, she should be a Lifebook leader. And I was like, oh, okay. And so the seed had been planted, and then we have grown so much by doing Lifebook, and it has changed our life. You know, we've been through this horrible experience with the Poem syndrome and the radiation treatment and almost losing him. And yet we've talked about it. We would not change it because of everything that we have learned, of all of the growth we have gained from what happened. And that's the thing, is Lifebook is this beautiful process. It's this beautiful framework. You get to know yourself. You get to know your relationships. It brings you to a level of depth in relationships with people, in yourself, and it shifts your mindset. And then if you join the membership or the membership community, we're all speaking the Lifebook language. We're all speaking the same language, where you can talk interconnectivity, you can talk about categories, you can suggest strategies. And so to become a leader, it was just, I love it. I love what I do. I love being an ambassador in the community. And this was just the next thing.
Yeah, it's not that much different for me. Is that Lifebook was such a profound thing for me to experience and go through. And one of the things that Dani and I decided when I first started getting sick and started having the health issues and everything is, it's okay, we're going to have to go through this process regardless of whatever else is going on in our life. So why not make the best of it? Why not use whatever we're going through to possibly help someone else, so that if they have to make this journey or a similar journey, that they can have it just a little bit easier than what we did. And so when we went through the Lifebook process and everything, Dani and I had talked about it. And I was like, if the opportunity ever came where I could be a leader, and even though I'm not actively offering services or anything, I tend to tag team with Dani for different things throughout and whatnot. But I wanted the certification just to be able, so that down the road, when things are a little easier for me to work around, I can do that as well. Because for me, it's just such a valuable process, and not everybody's going to resonate with it. Not everybody's going to work with it, but for the people who are, looking for something and maybe dealing with something that John and Missy themselves can't directly address within their talks in the community and things like that. Back in health and fitness, I worked with another member to offer support calls for people who are dealing with health issues or disabilities, or people with disabilities who sometimes don't feel heard from the actual within the Lifebook community itself, because the videos don't address those kind of things, because John and Missy do not have direct experience with those kind of things. It's things like that made me want to be a leader and be able to be there, is just to support others who may be in that state where they're on the fence with it, but not quite sure how to connect to it. And just by being there, I'm hoping that I can at least help some people connect if they can't connect themselves.
It sounds like being able to take that next layer down for someone who is atypical.
Yeah.
So it sounds, if it's neuroatypical or health and fitness or even any of the other categories, it's I think one of the biggest assets of having leaders out here who can translate in some ways, if you will, or relate in a way that others can't. So it totally makes sense to me. So then if we were to thank you for the lead in, who specifically would you want to be working with to bring a Lifebook to? Is there a particular psychographic, demographic, people struggle barrier that people are looking to get over that you'd want to bring this process to?
Everyone? No. I probably could bring it to everyone if I wanted to, but we thought about this a lot. Ultimately, I like to bring it to people before they have to deal with the crisis that we did, because Lifebook was so integral in prepping us for when things went downhill. That would ultimately be it. But most of the time, people don't think about that until they've had the traumatic experience. We've thought about it, and there's so many people, when you go through something like cancer or having to get radiation treatment or chemotherapy or something like that, you go through this process where in the beginning, everybody is there and yes, I want to help you. I want to be there for you. And then as you get through it, then it's, oh, you're recovered now, or you're getting better. So then that support tends to fade away as those people go and find, other people to support, or they just think you don't need it. So ultimately, I think we really like to bring it to those people who have been through something like that, to say, okay, you have a new chance at life, but your health may be affected. You may not be where you want to be, but Lifebook can still give you the tools to either figure out how to get from point A to point B, or to just, that's one of the things that he brings to it, is learning to accept what you can do as you continue to strive for more, but working within the boundaries, the limitations that you currently have, without giving up complete hope and finding out like what you want to do.
And sometimes, yes, accepting the boundaries and still being willing to push them.
Yep,
just
exactly.
A little bit more, but not from, hey, I'm a multi-billion-dollar company owner and I'm in perfect health. Is for some, it's too far out of reach.
Yep.
So I get that. It's like, at first when you're talking about that, the word that came to mind was recovery, but that has so many other different connotations that go with it. So it's almost like the aftermath population.
Yeah.
It's what happens after all of the other stuff happens, is how do we continue the healing process after that, is that aftermath population.
Because like my situation is that it was a year and a half of not knowing, constant tests, all of this, until finally they pinpointed what was going on. Then we did the 5 weeks of radiation, and then coming out of that, it was like, okay, Now it's a wait and see process, because we have to see to make sure that the lesion site is not going to come back, or no new lesion sites pop back up. And if they do, then we're going to have to treat those in a different way. So there's sitting in that unknown state, because anybody who goes through any form of cancer treatments or anything like that, you are seeing your doctor regularly for 5 years or more post-treatment, because they are monitoring to make sure that nothing comes back and that your body shifts or settles itself back to either normal, or if something else starts to occur, then to catch it before it becomes a bigger problem down the road. So in that time frame, what happens? You're expected to go back to living your life, but what does that actually mean coming out of there? And so there are things that are part of our life vision, and part of my personal life vision that I have in there. I have no timeline for when those things are going to happen, because I don't know, and even my doctors have a hard time giving me ideas of timelines or anything like that. And I've found that doctors nowadays are actually even less likely to give you timelines on recovery, especially on recovery. They don't like to give you any firm numbers in regards to those kind of things, but they just monitor and watch your progress and things like that. And so there are things like, eventually I would like to run a marathon at some point. I don't know when that's going to happen, but it's there and it's out there. So those are the things that I still want to do that. So I keep doing all the physical therapy exercises, all the small exercises I do, even if I go months on end without seeing any physical or notable changes in what I'm doing, I continue to do them with the understanding that, you know what, there are times I lost function in my legs below the knees back in June, July of 2017. Back at the beginning, early part of 2021 was the first time I was able to move my toes, even though they move barely, like a quarter of an inch. I can actually physically move my toes again after 4.5 years of not being able to see any noticeable change. And over the last year, I've been able to slowly move them a little bit more. It's only like twice of what it was before. But the fact is that it's improving. It's improving very slowly, but I've let go of the time frame, and I just keep pushing myself to keep going. So
I think that's where focus goes, energy flows, in the words of, I hear Tony Robbins say it a lot. I don't know if he originated with it, but we are very careful on what we focus on.
Absolutely. And progress is certainly, no matter how small, is really important. And celebrating all those little wins is also uniquely important. It's the story that comes to mind is the bamboo story of you plant bamboo and you water it and you fertilize it for 4 or 5 years and you see nothing, and then it grows 60 feet in a few weeks, and you're like, okay, but you need to nurture it during that first 4 or 5 years to build the foundation until you see that progress. But it sounds like that's a community to bring hope to that community, where it does require that, because I hear a lot of the push, which some people can recoil from, but it's like finding that rhythm of, I'm doing this because I can see what's going to be at the end of it.
Yeah.
And then finding the joy as you're doing it, rather than being resentful that you have to continue doing it to potentially maybe sometimes see.
Yeah. It's the life vision itself is really important for that, because and one of the things over the last year that I've really started to realize that I've embraced is, you know what? It's not the destination, it's the journey. And I'm finding myself truly embracing the journey more and more every day. And just even the idea, I've even said to myself, it's, you know what? I might not run this marathon until I'm in my 70s, but that's okay. It doesn't matter. And it's even if it never happens, because very early on, one of the things I was having when I first started getting sick and I started losing function, I would have dreams of myself functioning normally and things like that. And waking up out of those dreams and realizing I did not have that functionality was really hard to deal with emotionally. And this was before I was getting therapy. So I would just get angry, and I internalized a lot of that anger to the point where I remember waking up one morning and I was so angry. I just remember thinking to myself, just fucking stop it. I don't want to dream this anymore. And I never had a dream where I was fully functional again for 3 years after that. And I don't know if that impacted the speed of my recovery or anything like that. But as I started to reconnect to myself and everything, I really started to understand that regardless of how that was, I basically told my body that I didn't want it doing that anymore. And I've forgiven myself for that, but I've also promised myself to never do that to myself again. So there are days where I wake up and I'm frustrated that I'm not able to do things, but I'm like, you know what? That's fine, because things are still improving. I may not see it now, but 6 months down the road, when I stop and look back at this moment, things are going to be different, no matter how small, and I can celebrate that. And that's what I take forward now.
Thank you for touching on that, because it's one of the things that Bruno and I talk about is this programming of the subconscious. And waking up and telling your brain, don't give me that anymore, or stop that. It definitely does plant that seed on that other 80% of our brain we don't use consciously all the time. So did it have an impact? I think the answer to that, even though you said you don't know or not, I think you know it, but
and it's ultimately, it shifts my perspective on the way I look at myself and my own recovery and everything like that. And while I've started reading some Joe Dispenza, who really touches on all of that, and it's amazing the amount of work he does, and the fact that he's attaching science and medical research and things to it to help people understand how it works. Medical science itself has a hard time explaining exactly how it works. I find that regardless of how it works, I feel better about it every day, and I'm able to deal with the setbacks or the disappointments or anything, because my perspective on it is in a healthier place than it was before.
I know in us just watching the two of you moving as one unit, as I know that you've been challenged with a lot of physical ailments, but I know, Danny, you as the caregiver have also been challenged just as much, because in some ways the roles are a little bit reversed, is you're carrying the weight of the family, when generally the masculine role in so many relationships is supposed to carry the weight. And there's all kinds of emotions that come up with that for us in both cases, but it's a testament to how much you two are working as a team, and that one steps in when you have the tools and the skills and the strength to do it, and sometimes you have to take a step back and let the other person do it. So it's a lot of strength in a relationship when that's possible, because
we've watched relationships break down because the one person couldn't handle being the caregiver, or they lost communication. And I think it all goes back to intention. As soon as when he proposed to me, I said, okay, but there's no option for divorce in this, because my parents had gotten divorced and it was horrible. And so I told him, I'm like, we get married, there will be we have to make this work. You marry me, you're stuck with me. And so we had hard conversations when he was really sick. And I think one of the things that motivated him is I don't want to leave you girls alone with. And so
one of the things is it was because I was like, we didn't know what was going on. We didn't know everything. And one of the things, when we were still in that unknown phase of what was going on, when we had just found out about the whole POEMS diagnosis and everything, one of the things, when you look it up, depending on the severity of what you're dealing with, they have time frames depending on the severity of it, you can only have a life expectancy of 2 to 4 years or 8 to 10 years, depending on what you're dealing with. And some cases, you can go back to a normal life, but a lot of it's all dependent on what was going on. And there were lots of unknowns. And one of the things I was like, it's not so much that I'm afraid of dying. It's how much I will miss seeing the kids grow up, how much I will miss just the time I have with Danny. And I was like, I'm not going to allow myself to focus on the things that may happen or the things I may not get to do. So what is it that I can focus on now? And that was really the beginning of our shift in mindset about how we were going to approach not only my illness, but whatever came afterward. And ironically, that's also why we step back a lot and keep ourselves open to opportunities, because we're just like, you know what? We want to be able to just, if something unbelievable presents itself, we're just going to seize it and we're going to take it and we're going to go. And I think we've been doing pretty good with that so far.
Nice. So if there are people who are interested in an opportunity to work with you, how do they get a hold of you?
They can go to our website, or my website, innerlighthousemusings.com. And I'm also on Instagram at innerlighthousemusings. So you can contact me there, see what we offer. I just love to meet new people and talk Lifebook. So
Nice. And I think that we're also awesome. So that way we can connect that in the show notes here so they can get a hold of you if they want to learn more about your story, if they actually want to work with you specifically. It's one of the things why I like doing this interview with Lifebook Leaders is that if something that Dani and Jensey have talked about really resonates with you, please reach out to them, because they may be the right person to help you move through this process, to take this on and actually look at your life in this way that is living so intentionally, which is a huge aspect of what my podcast is about, is let's live intentionally in our life.
Yeah.
And my message may not be the one that resonates with you, but Dani's might, or Jensey's might. So please reach out and get some help on this, because that's how we all elevate, is by working with other people. So thank you for spending this time with me, and I look forward to actually talking to you in the future. And for those of you who enjoyed conversations like this, we are actually putting these interviews in a playlist. So we have Jen's from last month and then Dani this month. We're going to be interviewing the Heroes Tribe next month. So there's a crew of 3 people, Camilla, Sasha, and Judith, I believe is the other person's name. We're going to be interviewing next month as we approach the idea of the hero's journey and training to go through it. So thank you so much for spending some time with us, and please subscribe to the channel if this is the kind of conversations you enjoy. If you like this conversation, please hit. If you have questions for Dani and Jensey you want to put here in the YouTube video, please put those as comments. We'll make sure that actually Dani gets those and Jensey so they can respond to them. So thank you again.
thank you.
Thank you.
Anytime. And this is Michael Danklefs of the Elevate Your Best podcast. Thank you and have a great day.